June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. The first light of dawn broke through the low, gray clouds, glinting faintly off the steel helmets of soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder inside a flat-bottomed craft. The English Channel heaved beneath them, cold and merciless. Salt water sprayed over their faces as the landing craft slammed against the waves, engines roaring to stay on course. Every man knew what awaited them on the other side: machine guns, mines, barbed wire, and death. A sergeant gripped the rope railing, shouting over the noise, 30 seconds. The ramp in front of them rattled violently, chains clanking in rhythm with the pounding surf. The soldiers braced themselves, hands tightening around their rifles. In that tense, heart-stopping moment before the door fell open, no one thought about the man who made this landing possible. His name was Andrew Higgins, a shipbuilder from New Orleans who had never set foot in a war zone, but whose invention was about to change the course of history. As the ramp dropped, the sea rushed in. Men stormed forward, boots splashing into the cold water, bullets slicing through the air. The flat-bottomed craft that had carried them through hell and delivered them directly onto enemy territory wasn't designed by the military. It wasn't made in secret labs or by government committees. It came from the mind of one stubborn, brilliant civilian who refused to take impossible for an answer. Back in 1938, long before the Allies even dreamed of D-Day, Higgins was already at war. His battle wasn't fought with guns but with bureaucracy. He owned a small boat company, Higgins Industries, specializing in shallow draft boats that could navigate the swamps and bayous of Louisiana. When the U.S. Marine Corps struggled to find a reliable landing craft capable of putting troops directly onto a beach, Higgins saw his chance. The military said it couldn't be done. The Navy's designs were too heavy, too deep, and too complicated to mass produce. But Higgins knew what worked in the mud and the marsh. He sketched, built, tested, and rebuilt. His boats could skim over shallow water, run up on sand, and back away in seconds. They weren't elegant, but they worked. By 1940, as war loomed over Europe, his small New Orleans workshop turned into a humming, clanging factory of innovation. Welders sparked day and night. The smell of oil and hot steel filled the air. Higgins didn't wait for contracts. He built prototypes on his own dime and sent them straight to Washington. The Navy ignored him. The Marines laughed. But Higgins kept sending boats. Then one day a photograph changed everything. It showed a Japanese landing craft captured in China, a boat with a ramp in the front. Higgins saw it and immediately understood what it meant. Troops could charge directly out instead of climbing over the sides. He took the idea, improved it, and made it American, stronger, faster, and built for mass production. Within months, the first LCVP, landing craft vehicle personnel, was born. The ramp dropped down like a drawbridge and out came men, jeeps, and even small tanks. It was simple, brilliant, and terrifyingly effective. And on that June morning off the coast of Normandy, those very boats, the Higgins boats, turned the tide of war. New Orleans, 1939. Andrew Higgins stood in the middle of his shipyard, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shouting over the hiss of steam and the clang of hammers. Around him, hundreds of workers, carpenters, welders, engineers, and laborers, moved like clockwork in the heat of Louisiana's sun. The air reeked of diesel and sawdust, the ground slick with oil. Higgins wasn't a general or a politician. He was a fighter of a different breed. He had built his business from nothing, starting with a handful of men building boats for loggers and trappers in the bayou. But when the U.S. military ignored his landing craft ideas, he declared war on the red tape itself. "The Navy's design can't land a rowboat on a beach," he barked to a visiting officer. "Mine can land an army." Higgins was brash, loud, and fearless. A man who could curse out a colonel in the morning and shake hands with a senator by lunch. He believed in results, not ranks. And in the growing shadow of World War II, results were exactly what America needed. By 1941, his factory had grown into a powerhouse. Higgins Industries expanded across several city blocks. Women joined the assembly lines, working side by side with men. African American and white workers shared the same floor, an unheard-of policy in the Deep South at the time. Higgins didn't care about segregation or class. He cared about speed and precision. "You can build boats or you can build excuses," he told his foreman. "But you can't build both." When war broke out and America entered the fight, the government came knocking. Suddenly, the same officers who dismissed him were desperate for his boats. The military needed thousands of landing craft for a global war that would stretch from the Pacific to Europe. And only Higgins could deliver. Factories ran 24 hours a day under floodlights. Production lines turned out boats faster than anyone thought possible. LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, rolled out one after another, each stamped with the proud Higgins Industries emblem. At its peak, Higgins' workforce reached over 20,000 men and women. He called them his soldiers of production. They built not only LCVPs but patrol boats, torpedo boats, and supply vessels. The rhythm of hammers and engines echoed across New Orleans day and night, a heartbeat of American industry. But even as the orders poured in, Higgins never lost sight of the human cost. He read the headlines, saw the photos of soldiers landing on beaches across the Pacific. He knew every ramp that dropped meant lives were at stake. Every weld, every bolt mattered. In a letter to one of his foremen, he wrote, "We're not just building boats. We're building chances. Every boat we finish is a chance for some boy to come home." By 1943, the Allies were preparing for something far greater, a landing unlike any before. Codenamed Operation Overlord, it would require over 5,000 ships and more than 150,000 men. The question haunting Eisenhower's planners was simple: how do we get them onto the beach? The answer sat waiting in New Orleans, lined up in neat rows of steel and wood, Higgins LCVPs. May 1943, Portsmouth, England. Rain pelted the steel hulls in the harbor, washing over decks crowded with soldiers, officers, and engineers. Among them stood a group of U.S. Navy officers staring at an oddly shaped boat bobbing in the gray water. Its bow looked different, squared off, not pointed. Its draft was shallow, almost flat. The ramp at the front hung open like a jaw. "This thing," one officer muttered, "looks more like a barge than a war machine." Another man, a wiry captain with a cigar clamped between his teeth, smiled faintly. "You'll change your mind when you see what it can do." The boat's designer, Andrew Higgins, had sent prototypes to England for testing. The British and Americans were skeptical at first. Traditional naval landing craft were deep-hulled, meant for docks or calm waters. But Higgins' LCVP was built differently. It could skim over just 10 inches of water, drive right onto a beach, and drop its ramp to unleash men, jeeps, or small tanks directly under fire. That front ramp, simple, brutal, effective, was the key. It turned a beach into a highway. No more clumsy over-the-side exits, no more soldiers drowning under the weight of their packs. Now men could charge straight from boat to sand, rifles raised, ready for battle. The LCVP's simplicity was its genius. It was made mostly of plywood and steel, cheap, fast to build, and easy to repair. It could carry 36 fully equipped soldiers or a jeep and a squad or a small tank. The flat bottom allowed it to slide onto beaches and back off again without a dock or a crane. During the demonstration, a group of Royal Marines watched as a test crew approached the shore. The engines roared, the bow surged upward, and then with a shuddering crash, the ramp dropped. Soldiers rushed out, splashing through the surf, weapons raised. Within seconds they had formed a line along the beach. The officers were stunned. The speed was unmatched. The efficiency undeniable. One British commander turned to the American liaison and said quietly, "Gentlemen, that boat will win the next war." Back in Washington, General Dwight D. Eisenhower reviewed the reports himself. He understood logistics better than anyone, and Higgins' design solved the one problem that had haunted every amphibious assault in history: how to land an army on a defended shore. He ordered mass production immediately. By late 1943, Higgins' factories were turning out 700 boats per month. Each one tested, inspected, and shipped to the front. From the Pacific Islands to the North African coast, the Higgins boat became the face of Allied invasion. One officer described them best. "They were ugly little bastards, loud, clumsy, and flat. But they never failed us." And now, as June 1944 approached, the Allies prepared for their most daring gamble yet: Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings on Normandy's coast. The entire success of the invasion would depend on one thing: whether Higgins' boats could carry men through hell and back. June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. 4:30 a.m. The English Channel boiled with life. Thousands of ships stretched across the horizon, destroyers, transports, battleships, and among them, thousands of Higgins boats loaded with young soldiers staring silently into the gray dawn. Each man carried roughly 80 pounds of gear, rifles, ammo, rations, and fear. The sea spray slapped their faces as engines roared, forming a deafening chorus that seemed to shake the world awake. Inside one boat, a 19-year-old from Ohio gripped his helmet and whispered, "God, just let me make it to the sand." The sergeant beside him nodded but said nothing. Words had no power here, only courage did. Ahead, the coast of France appeared through the mist. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. Then, suddenly, the sky exploded. German artillery thundered from the cliffs, shredding the water with fire and steel. "Hold on," the coxswain yelled. The Higgins boat bounced violently in the surf, bullets whining off its steel plating. Men ducked instinctively, clutching their helmets. A few prayed. Others vomited from fear and salt water. Then came the order, "Drop the ramp." The coxswain pulled the lever. The ramp slammed open and daylight flooded in. Instantly, machine gun fire tore through the first row of men. The front of the boat became a storm of chaos, soldiers falling, shouting, slipping on blood and seawater. But still, the rest surged forward, leaping into the cold surf, wading chest-deep toward the beach. All across Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches, the same scene unfolded, rows of Higgins boats slamming onto sand, spilling men into carnage. Some boats sank before reaching shore. Others returned for more trips, carrying reinforcements and supplies under constant fire. The genius of Higgins' design was now being tested in the most brutal way possible, and it was holding. Boats that survived one run turned back for another. Crews worked like machines, ignoring the chaos, shouting over gunfire, "Keep her steady. Load up. Move." By midday, despite horrific losses, the Allies had carved out a fragile foothold. Tanks rumbled ashore, medics dragged the wounded to safety, and flags began to rise from the dunes. When Eisenhower received word that the beaches were secure, he reportedly stared at the report for a long time before saying quietly, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." And he wasn't exaggerating. Without those flat-bottomed plywood boats, without that strange, square-nosed design born in the swamps of Louisiana, the D-Day invasion might have failed. By nightfall, more than 150,000 men had landed in Normandy. Every single one of them had arrived on a Higgins boat. It was, as one veteran later said, the longest day, but the boats never quit. When the smoke cleared and Europe began to breathe again, the world started to count its heroes, generals, presidents, and soldiers. But far away from the headlines, in a quiet office in New Orleans, Andrew Higgins sat at his desk surrounded by blueprints, tools, and the faint scent of sawdust. He wasn't wearing medals. He wasn't saluted in parades. But across the Atlantic, millions of men owed their lives to his imagination. Before the war, Higgins had been a boat builder for swamp loggers, a loud, stubborn man who cursed like a sailor and refused to take no for an answer. His employees called him Hurricane Higgins, because when he entered a room, it felt like one had just hit. He fought Navy bureaucracy for years, shouting at officers who dismissed his small wooden boats as ugly ducklings. But when the military realized his shallow draft design could do what no other vessel could, cross sand, mud, and coral without grounding, suddenly every shipyard in America wanted a piece of his vision. By 1943, Higgins Industries had grown from a small shop into a war machine employing over 20,000 people, many of them women and African Americans. In an age when segregation still ruled America, Higgins opened his doors to everyone. "If a man or woman can do the job," he said, "then that's who I want on my team." Under his leadership, the factory ran day and night. Sparks flew from welding torches. Hammer strikes echoed through New Orleans like gunfire. Workers didn't just build boats, they built a lifeline for freedom. Each LCVP landing craft, vehicle, personnel, was a symbol of democracy's strength. Simple, efficient, unstoppable. Higgins boats carried not only soldiers but the weight of an entire world's hope. And when Eisenhower said, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us," the statement wasn't flattery. It was fact. Without Higgins, the Allies would never have stormed Normandy, liberated France, or broken Hitler's Atlantic Wall. But Higgins himself remained restless. Even after victory, he couldn't slow down. He designed faster boats, air-cushioned vehicles, and amphibious tanks, always chasing the next innovation. Yet by the 1950s, as the war faded into memory, his company began to decline. Contracts ended, factories closed, and the man who had changed history slipped quietly into obscurity. He died in 1952, a forgotten hero of the greatest invasion ever staged. Today few recognize his name. But every time a U.S. Marine lands on a foreign shore, every time a soldier steps off a ramp onto sand, the legacy of Andrew Higgins rides with them. His invention didn't just win a war. It redefined what human ingenuity could achieve when one man refused to accept the impossible. "The right idea," Higgins once said, "can carry more soldiers than any general ever could." And in June 1944, on the blood-soaked beaches of Normandy, that idea carried the free world to victory.